the Intolerance book about the agenda of intolerance in the culture today. Like I'm living around like a lot of intolerant people that doesn't it's like my views, as I don't agree with some lifestyles, as homosexuality, one of them. And the difference between intolerance is that I can live with a person and be nice to a person that's homosexual in a different religion, and don't attack the person, even though I don't agree with them. But it's not like that with everybody else that I live around. They have intolerance of anger. If you don't agree with them, it's something else, and that's intolerance. Like they can't just be like, oh wow, it's okay. If you don't agree with that lifestyle, it's not a big deal. Like it's nothing we can do about it. Like grow up, live your life. I don't know. It's so weird. Cultures. So here's the book. Don't matter with education. So it says here it might be useful to distinguish between what is going on in the broader academic world and what is transpiring in Christian colleges, seminaries, and universities. In the former, it is easy to chart the rising pressure to conform to the new tolerance. Take the case of Scott McConnell, a graduate student in education at Lee Memorial College. In 2005, he wrote a term paper arguing that the ideal classroom environment would be based upon strong discipline and hard work that could include corporal punishment. He received an A for his paper, in line with his 378 GPA. Some months later, however, he was dismissed from the college by the chair of the education department. And she cited a mismatch between his personal beliefs regarding teaching what learning in the Lee Memorial College program goals, with the help of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, and the Center for Individual Rights, CIR. McConnell took Lee Memorial to court and won. He was reinstated into the program. He argued that the college had acted in bad faith and that they had promised freedom of expression and then expelled him when he expressed himself. Also in 2005, Noah Rana The president of the Dartmouth Student Assembly spoke a congregation, welcoming the freshmen to campus, a traditional responsibility of the student body present. He said that the inequation of knowledge is less than what they should be striving for. The development of character is a more important goal. Then he added, character has a lot to do with sacrifice, laying our personal interests down for something bigger. The best example of this is Jesus. He knew the right thing to do. He knew the cost would be agonizing torture and death, and he did it anyway. The characters Noah, Rainer went on to talk briefly about what Jesus achieved on the cross. Immediately, a controversy erupted. On the one hand, a vice president of the student body wrote to Rainer, I consider your choice of topic for the convocation speech reprehensible in an abuse of power. You embarrassed the organization. You embarrass yourself. On the other, a Jewish student wrote, many of us in the Dartmouth community proudly disagree with that and other aspects of Rainer's religious beliefs. But our disagreements do not give us the right to limit his speech. One of the most insightful reflections on the Bradaha came from Noah Rainer himself. The problem is not that Dartmouth has a formalized speech code. That would be easy to deal with and easy for students to break. The problem is that Dartmouth has a speech culture where some topics are off limits and some preceptives. Shouldn't be uttered. In other words, in the tolerant world, some things are intolerable, especially those judged to be intolerant. Dartmouth College, of course, is the same institution which several years earlier forbade campus crusade from distributing 1,000 copies of C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity on the grounds that it might offend non-Christian students. Note well, the banned publication was not pornographic instructions on how to make a bomb, a book on pedophilia, or listen on anarchically. Would Dartmouth have banned any such volume on the ground that certain students might be offended? This book was a rather mild Christian apologetic, first delivered as lectures on the British radio during the World War II. The vigorous protest eventually forced Dartmouth to reverse its decision. Indeed, during the last 10 years, there have been attempts to de-recognize chapters of Intervarsity Christian Fellowship at Tufts, Harvard, Rutgers, the University of North Carolina, and elsewhere. In each case, the local chapter was charged with being discriminationary, either because it insisted that its officers, though not its members, must subscribe to its statement of faith, or because it refused to accept among its officers those who advocate or practice homosexuality. Thus, the undergraduate council, or whatever body was involved in any specific case discriminated against Christians on the ground that these Christians were discriminating against others. Usually there was a little, if any, recognition on the part of the authorities that their zeal for non-discrimination was not only ironically inconsistent, but was leading them into the specific form of discrimination forbidden by the First Amendment. So far, when these cases have been settled in court, the settlement has been in favor of the Christian organization. Not so in the Hastings College of Law and in the University of California. Their local chapter of the Christian Legal Society was banned by the college on the ground that the chapter is discriminatory. It allowed only those who agreed with the CSL's statement of faith to fill leadership positions. In particular, Hastings asserted that COS could not require that its leaders, on the basis of the statement of faith, pledged to abstain from unrepentant participation in or adversary of a sexual immoral lifestyle. The lawsuit that followed wound its way up to the Supreme Court, which on a 5-4 vote ruled in favor of Hastings. Because of the ruling comes from the highest court. In the land, some see this decision as a harbinger of what will come every evangelical group that takes a moral stand on the U.S. campus will be banned. The groups will continue, of course, off campus if necessary. And the constables, as it were, frankly, however, many legal experts do not expect that these nightmare scenarios will unfold. The ruling is narrow, and another case could be taken all the way to the Supreme Court if it could be shown that the policy is allowing infiltration of group for subversive purposes, or if a similar ruling were not reaching regarding, say, the requirements that a campus Muslim group might place on its leadership. Time will tell. These struggles between Christian groups and universities have not been restricted to the United States. In Britain, for instance, the same decade witnessed attempts by Birmingham University, the University of Edinburgh, and 2 or 3 others to ban the local Christian Union, a local chapter of universities and college Christian fellowship, the British of American, from their campus for their very similar reasons. Although these challenges sometimes go on for 2 or 3 years, so far they have had a happy result. What is so interesting, however, is the way in which universities historically, the basis of free speech and free thinking, have repeatedly, in the name of tolerance, exhibited remarkable intolerance. In the case of Edinburgh University, for instance, the authorities banned the CU from meeting on campus to discuss sexual ethics on the ground that the Orthodox Christian view is offensive to homosexuals. In one case, the situation became so ludicrous that even the liberal newspaper, The Guardian, became sympathetic to the CU, opening in its editorial pages to an essay by Richard Cuddiman, the director of the UCCF. Covington wrote, G.K. Chesterton once said that the purpose of an open mind is the same as that of an open mouth. To close it again on something solid, if open-mindedness is being defined as a refusal to make judgments about religious truth and sexual ethics. For instance, then we are prone to contract in a form of intellectual jackjaw. Not all this accompanied passion for the new tolerance is directed against Christians, of course. In 2006, Bob Barrera, a student at the Art Institute of Portland, Oregon, and a committed atheist, he even ran a blog called Portland Atheists, walked up to an informal group of students who, after class, was discussing spirituality. Ariel challenged one particular student religious belief, and he did not question her right to hold them, but asked rather what evidence she had to back them up. The nature of these beliefs: she believed in astral projections and leprechauns living on another energy level. The student complained to the authorities, and after several rounds in which Ariel's exchange with the other student was described as an altercation, in his attempt to bring in another student who had witnessed the exchange, was taken as rude and belligerent behavior. Ariel was dismissed from the institute with less than a year to go before graduation. For its part, the institution claimed it dismayed everywhere on the ground that his behavior was aggressive, demanding, demeaning, and threatening. Nor these pressure restricted students on the 15th of September 2004, a long time adjunct professor at DePaul University, Thomas Clark, observed a pair of tables set up by student activists. Those activists represented two groups, Students for Justice in Palestine and Unite Muslims moving ahead. He engaged the students on their claims, pointing out that historically the term Palestinian is problematic because it was once a generic term that referred to Muslim Jews and Christians who live in a geographical area rather than to a single ethnicity. One of the students said she was deeply assaulted by his remarks. Immediately, discussion was wrapped up until the students claimed the Israelis are treating the Palestinians the way Hitler treated the Jews. Clark argued that there are some important differences. What happened next is disputed. Clark claims he realized that discussion was futile. Put down the flyer calmly and from his chin, Italian style, to indicate, "I'm out of here." The students claim he threw his flyer onto the table and gave them the finger. The entire encounter lasts about 15 minutes. Despite the fact that he had an inviolable record of teaching, Clark was promptly suspended and he took the case to court, suing DePaul for defamation. After 4 years, Cook County Circuit Court Judge Charles Winkler dismissed the case, March chapter 2009. Clark appealed at the right end. The case has not yet been decided, regardless of the rights and wrongs of particular arguments. Clark's academic career to play groups of students who could not tolerate an opinion counter to their own without complaining they were assaulted and demeaned. And the culture association of the new tolerance tends to work in their favor in the adjudication process. In his reporting 2005 essay, John J. Miller details many instances of professors in America who have faced similar challenges. In one sense, of course, the spirit of tolerance on college and university campus can be a helpful thing. It is sometimes easier for a Christian to find a place at the table today than it was 30 or 40 years ago. But the price is high if the Christian maintains that there is an exclusive element in Christian confessionalism, which of course applies that others are in some measure wrong. The place at the table is often quickly withdrawn. The grounds for the withdrawal are not formally speaking that the Christian is a Christian, but that the Christian is intolerant, which cannot be tolerated. Thus the world of academia exerts not so suitable pressures for Christians to develop a form of attentability, Christians' expressions that disown or at least silence the exclusiveness claims that are grounded in Scripture itself, as Nathan Hatch put it. The modern intellectual world is adrift, incapable or unwilling to allow any claim of certainty to set the coordinates by which ideas and commitments are to be judged. The positive side of the situation, of course, is that toleration and subjectivity have become the principal virtues of our age, meaning that marginal groups, even evangelicals, are accorded far more respect than they were earlier in the country. The danger is that the gentle lamb of toleration often returns as the wolf of relativism. Christians then are both better off and worse off. Better in that they are tolerated like everyone else. Worse in that no claimed truth carries weight any longer. If these are the beings that are going on in the border academic world, what is transparent in Christian territory institutions. Like children long rejected, evangelical scholars are still too anxious to be accepted by their peers, too willing to move only in directions that allow them to be relevant. The result is that we have been far more inclined to speak up when our Christian convictions are in tune with the associations of modern academic life than when they are at odds. It is much easier, for instance, to set oneself in the vanguard of social progress than it is to define those Christian associations that the established and fashionable and luxury circles of our day regard as observant and fancify. Yet it is tougher mental fight that we must not avoid. These pressures must be faced not only when the Christian academic operates in, say, a state university, but even when he or she is ensorcelled in a Christian college. The uniqueness of Christ's Trinitarian theology claims of what was achieved exclusively by Jesus' death and resurrection. The assistance that God of the Bible is the creator and judge of all. These claims are intolerable, and Christians will be constantly pressured, both directly and indirectly, to tone down them. If we do not, there will be a price to pay in reputation, or prices if no other. No matter how winsomely we manage to handle ourselves, if we are in the Christian higher education are determined to live out our alliance to Christ, and we, well, as Jesus instructs us, in spirit some of his reproach. Genuine pluralism within the border culture is facilitated with there is a strong Christian voice loyal to the scriptures, as well as strong Muslim voices, skeptical voices, Buddhist voices, atheist voices, and so forth. Genuine pluralism within the border culture is not fostered when in the name of tolerance, none of the voices can say that any of the others is wrong. And this stance is the only ultimate virtue. Louis Boyce and Gerald D. Mayo conducted a LexisNexis database search of how free newspapers in New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and Washington Post wrote about the culture wars during the decade in 1990-2000. During that span of time, these three papers published only 18 articles linking the culture wars to secularist religious cleavage dividing the Democratic and Republican parties. During the same span, they published 59 stories about the role play by secularists in these conflicts, along with a whopping 29 articles about the political machinations of evangelical and fundamental Christians. In other words, in the media perception, the doors to open in the country are regularly laid at the door of those who are not well represented in the media. Because the new tolerance and ostensibly value from tolerance has become the dominant religion among media leaders, this vision is constantly reinforced. For instance, the media may present popes such as John Paul II and Benedict in a positive light, provided these popes are restricting themselves to ceremony or world poverty. But if they show how their beliefs impinge on social issues such as premarital and extramarital sex, abortion, homosexuality, and euthanasia, then they must be bigoted out of the date, slightly bizarre, both dangerous and certainly intolerant. That's so funny. Ladies. Those are so okay. That's why the lady, she threw that Bible track on the ground because she's intolerant. Intolerant if you agree with her, disagree with her religion. She can't handle it. For me, it's just, I don't care if you disagree with me. Like, I don't believe in like doing stuff to people just because they don't agree with my views. Like, that's intolerant. Like, that person got problems. How would they do other things that people don't agree with them? Are they gonna act like a baby? Cry like a baby? Have temper tantrums like a child? In 2001, former CBS newsman Bernard Goldman published a book with the title BS, a CBS insider exposes how the media distort the news. His thesis is not that the media are controlled by liberal versus conservative BS per se, nor by a Democrat versus Republican BS. Rather, their BS is generated by a kind of social culture, intellectual and professional and breeding. They think of themselves as wonderfully diverse and broadly representative of the nation because they make sure that they hire a representative mix of gender and race. What is lacking, however, is a representation mix of it intellectual and cultural quotients, and there is a little diversity of thought. The media will display a deep and thoughtful commitment to assuring that they have a representative number of women on the board, but these women and men will not hold representative views on abortion, gun control, homosexuality, and the importance of religion in one's life. Thus, while they feel they are on the cutting edge of a profound tolerance, there are many domains of the media's life that are hugely intolerant, invariably, even while hardworking journalists are doing their best to be responsible and as objective as possible. The common narrowness of these horizons fosters patterns of distortion in the news that are becoming troubling. And this has been going on for decades. In 1972, Pauline Kael, movie critic for The New Yorker, won a bit of immorality for herself by announcing after the elections that returned Nixon to power. "I can't believe it. I don't know a single person who voted for him." Considering Nixon won 49 of the 50 states, Keir imagined to do nothing more than demonstrate her rather sad isolation from most people in the nation. The domain of homosexuality behavior. For more than 2 decades, the Boy Scouts of America have been under attack for not admitting girls. A, not admitting girls. B, not admitting atheists. And C, not permitting allowed homosexuals to serve in any leadership capacity. As numerous expensive lawsuits the Boy Scouts fought, they had secured some tranquility when in 2000 the Supreme Court's Dell decision ruled that as a private organization that the Boy Scouts were entitled to choose their own members. But although the ACLU, meaning the American Civil Liberties Union, lost in the ruling, it did not give up. Instead, it has joined with assorted gay rights groups to attack the Boy Scouts' ties to public institutions, which are numerous and complicated. For instance, the Scouts often recruit in public schools and are given special treatment in the use of state and national parks for their jamborees. On the other hand, these privileges are in one sense paid for. In the summer of 2008, for instance, the Order of the Arrow jet in which 5,000 volunteers devoted 5 weeks to assorted the conversation project and improving the public facilities in national forests across the country. Since 2004, the Boy Scouts have devoted something close to 10 million hours in assisting public programs and improving public property. Another project of the Boy Scouts is The Good Truth for America, cleans up hundreds of city parks and school guards. To become an Eagle Scout, a candidate must lead his troop in a community service project. Scouts in Arizona have invested thousands of hours in fire prevention and conservation projects in and around the Grand Canyon. So the ACLU, others have pronounced on the Scouts. In numerous struggles, none directly related to homosexuality, all having to do with the relationship of the Scouts to public and the public institutions. In 2003, the ACLU, on behalf of a lesbian couple and on agnostic couple, argued that the Scouts are a religious organization and therefore it leaves with saying that it will violate the establishment clause. Therefore, its lease with San Diego violate the establishment clause. And These leases have enabled the Scouts to run Camp Bella and half the acre on Fiesta Island for almost a century, during which time they are keeping them open to the public. The resultant lawsuits continue. In 1928, Philadelphia leased a half of acre property to the Scouts, and they in turn constructed a 7,500 square foot Beaks Arcs headquarters at their own expense. In 2000, the Philadelphia Council tried to evict the Scouts, and when that demand failed, they demanded $2,000. So, where am I? The premiere and rent. The Scouts must pay up or stop discriminating against homosexuals and atheists. Quite apart from questions of equally who really owns that building in which none of the money invested came from the city. And would it not be more pluralistic and genuinely tolerant for the city to say that if homosexuals and or atheists want to build a similar institute, the city of Philadelphia would be just as helpful to them as they have been in the past to the Scouts? Know that will never do. What the new tolerance means is that government must be intolerant of those who do not accept the new definition of tolerance. In these two locations, San Diego and Philadelphia, stand for these locations stand for numerous other struggles the Scouts have endured during the past decade, mostly on the coast, all in the name of tolerance. It is not easy to predict how these and similar cases will turn out. 2 years ago in Massachusetts, Catholic Charities was told it had to withdraw from its adoption services or change its policies and become willing to place children with same-sex couples. Catholics, Christians stop its service. How this will benefit needy children in that state is less than clear. One might argue that the Catholic charities could have and should have stopped its service, how benefit it. The charities could have less than other clear. One might argue that the Catholic Church could have and should have put up a better fight. World Vision and evangelical charity requires that employees refrain from external sexual activity, including, of course, homosexual activity. In 2005, I cannot read this. World Vision was awarded $1 million by the Office of Justice Programs address escalate in juvenile and gang violence in Virginia. Eventually, the law I don't know, this word is so small. The World Vision was awarded $1 million by the Office of Justice Programs to address escalating juvenile and gang violence in Virginia. Eventually, laws so the World Vision on the basis of the religious freedom restoration of the RFRA 1993. After all, as Carr Espert, a law professor at the University of Missouri, observes, in non-religious organizations receiving federal grant, Hood requires okay. One religious organization receiving federal grant, Moody's freely hire based on their Mormon mission, just as a Planned Parenthood requires their employees be pro-choice. And Sierra Clubs screens appliance based on their view of global warming. Religious groups goodness. Religious groups likewise cannot remain true to their founding critical purposes unless religious groups exclusive likewise can remain true to their founding critical purposes unless employees are aligned with the enterprise and come of the mission. And the Arabia goes to say, one who has never disagreed with others about religion is not thereby commonly tolerant by its religious differences. As if religious beliefs do not matter, that is just a soft form of religious bigotry and sometimes common sense for else. I need to like lay down. My legs hurt from walking so much. I have to read this in the morning when I wake up. 'Cause my eyes are falling asleep. My eyes are falling asleep. So I'll read when I get up in the morning. Have a good night.